Welcome you all to what promises to be a very interesting, important, and thought-provoking conversation on Zoom, as most conversations are these days. And my guest today is somebody all of you will value listening to, and I'm sure asking questions to. It's Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, one of India's great biotech entrepreneurs, also somebody who speaks her mind. Somebody who's studied science, who's done many things and who's acknowledged and respected globally. And let me also say, let me get a disclosure out of the way in the very beginning. She's among the few good people who have invested in ThePrint. In fact, you can see the entire list on our website. So with that out of the way, Kiran, welcome to this conversation. I know that there's a lot on all our minds and all of us are curious about what you are thinking. So if I may ask you, how, since you know about infectious disease and about drugs and about the latest in immunity, the area of immunity in particular, how infectious is COVID-19?
Well, if you look at, coronaviruses, there are basically three coronaviruses that we all know of. One is MERS, one is SARS, and of course, COVID-19. Now, if you actually plot them in terms of infectiousness and lethality, in terms of infection, I think all of them are almost the same. But when it comes to lethality, actually COVID-19 is the least lethal. Because SARS is more lethal than COVID-19, and MERS is even more lethal than the two. And if you look at why I say this is because if you look at the death rate, that means the number of people who have died in terms of in proportion to the infected population, MERS actually stands at 34%. SARS actually stands at 10%. And COVID-19 at the moment from the data that is available is just below 2%. So you can see that in terms of lethality, MERS was the most lethal, followed by SARS and now followed by COVID-19. But then what has really made this into a very serious pandemic is the fact that it has spread so fast and to some of the most important economies of the world, and it has completely decimated many of these economies. And that's what makes it so scary, because the Western economies, the Western populations have really not been able to deal with this onslaught of COVID-19 in a way that gives us comfort. And that's what is happening today. The panic, the kind of paranoia that has set in is because of the fact that the US, Europe, and UK have not been able to deal with this pandemic. Whereas if you look at Asia, we seem to be dealing with the pandemic much better. But nevertheless, we have to basically, learn from what we are seeing in the West and make sure that we are in a state of preparedness and that we know how to respond.
Now, if you look at MERS, it remained confined to one region, the Middle East. SARS, mostly confined to China and areas around it. It hardly went to Europe and elsewhere. H1N1 did spread a bit, but again died out, and vaccine also came in. Now, on the other hand, COVID-19 or this coronavirus has spread all over the world as none of the others did. So does it not then indicate that this is, as a virus, as a pathogen, is enormously more infectious than others?
So that's a very good question, Shekhar. And I have another aspect or a theory about why this has happened, okay? The SARS virus actually had, broke out in 2002 from Guangdong in China. And if you remember, in 2002, China was just getting connected with the world.
Right.
Looked at the number of flights out of China and into China, there were few and far between. Now, fast forward 2020 and you look at how many flights there are between China and the rest of the world, there are zillions of flights. In fact, there are direct flights, 3 flights a day, in fact, from Wuhan to Milan, Wuhan to Tehran. And these were the two first epicenters of the outbreak, right? Outside China in
Right.
that way.
Right.
And so what the theory is that these two centers actually have got large Chinese workforces, Tehran and northern Italy. And these workers actually
Not,
back.
Northern Italy because of the fashion industry, because the labels are there, but they produce in China.
Yeah. And these workforces actually went back to China over Chinese New Year, got infected in Wuhan, and flew back to Tehran and northern Italy and infected these populations. And that's where it started. The spread started because of travel. The spread would have been contained like in the past if we didn't have such a huge global aviation industry that connects the whole world. And that is why I think we need to be very, very cognizant of the fact that we can no longer avoid and overlook any of these pandemics. You know, one more thing I want to say, Shekhar, we got an alarm bell when MERS came. We
Right.
didn't listen to it. An alarm bell was rung even when SARS came. We didn't listen to it. And you know, the tragedy, I'll tell you, we did not even bother to develop vaccines. You know, to your point, that yes, the only two Western cities that got impacted by SARS was Toronto and London, which also had very high death rates in proportion to the positive cases. They started developing a vaccine, but the moment it got contained and controlled, they basically said, oh, this is an Asian flu, forget it. And that's how they forgot developing the vaccine. If we had a SARS vaccine, you know, Shekhar, I can tell you the world would be in a better place today. This tells you how connected we are and how important these viral pandemics are going to be forever. So we need to really look at viruses. We need to be very seriously focused and investing in infectious diseases. For a long time, infectious diseases were really not being now looked at. In fact, if you look at a lot of the investment dollars, most of the investment dollars have gone into NCDs.
Non-communicable diseases.
Yeah, non-communicable diseases
Like
like
diabetes,
cancer,
cardiovascular
like
disease, like,
Alzheimer's and neurological diseases and cardiovascular diseases and etc. etc. So I'm just saying now I think the world realizes that they have actually done a huge disservice to themselves by not focusing on infectious diseases because it affects the whole world.
So you think if the world was as connected in 2002 as it is in 2020, then that SARS would have also spread just like this all over the world.
Yes, that is my belief.
So it's not as if this virus is particularly more contagious. It is just that this world is more contagious, more connected.
Yeah, so if you look at the data that you have out there, it's just as infectious as SARS and MERS, but the lethality of SARS and MERS was worse. But
Right.
the fact that there was not this level of air travel, I think it got contained. Even MERS was contained to the Middle East because that's where it broke out, and you didn't have that kind of travel going out of there.
So should we be this scared as we are? Should we not be so scared?
Well, personally, I feel that first and foremost, there are three things, Shekhar. I think we should be on our guard. I'm not saying we should not be on our guard. We should certainly be very vigilant, but we should also look at least in the Indian context. I think we really need to get the paranoia out of us. We also need to make sure that we remove the social stigma connected with this virus. Because if you look at what's happening in our country, people are getting so confused. They're getting confused messages because of the West. The West has actually, hyperventilated, and rightly so, because they've really, really suffered badly. And we are extrapolating from the West and saying, hey, this could happen to us. Now, the actual data shows that it is not happening to us. If you look at the what they call the TPR or the the positive rates, the testing positive rates, you can see that India what we mean by testing positive rates means that the percentage of tested people who are positive is called the test positive rate. Okay. And if you look at the TPR in India, it's about 4.4%. 1 in 23 people tested are showing positive tests. If you compare this to the US, it is over 19%. Okay. If you compare this to Europe, it is over 18%. It's almost in that same sort of segment. And if you look at even Japan, it is double of India, which means that India is in a much better place than these countries in terms of the number of people who are testing positive, right? Secondly,
Right.
if you look at other countries in Asia, look at Pakistan, look at Bangladesh, look at Vietnam, look at Thailand, look at all these countries. Just track the number of deaths. Forget the TPRs, but look at even the deaths. We are trending very low compared to any part of the world. And so that gives me a kind of a comfort to say that we are able to, our immunity and our immune system is able to deal with this virus a lot better than Western populations. And the reason I say this is because these Asian populations have been exposed to a number of these viruses, including coronavirus, because SARS did spread to Asia. Okay. And we are constantly exposed to zoonotic viruses coming out of China.
Zoonotic viruses are ones that spread from
Animals
to humans.
Yeah. So these are called zoonotic viruses, and we are exposed to a lot of them. The swine flu, a lot of avian flu. All these are zoonotic viruses. So whereas this is something which is not so prevalent in the West, and certainly their exposure to these kind of viruses is very limited. With the result that when you have any of these kind of viruses actually, entering a population that is not exposed, it has a devastating effect. You remember the Spanish flu in
1918.
1918.
Yes.
That had the same effect on the world population because nobody was exposed to that virus. And, it wiped out a third of the world population, if you remember. So now you're looking at this particular virus, which is having a devastating effect on Western populations. Also, I must tell you one more thing. Let us not forget that the Western population, especially the European populations, are aging populations.
Right.
India actually is at an advantage because 90% of our population is below the age of 60. Whereas 80% of the people who are dying around the world are over the age of 60. So therein also gives you that comfort that India should be in a better place. So when you come to, lifting the lockdown, I certainly believe the people over 60 should be protected. But since 90% of our population and the main workforce is below the age of 60, I think we are in a safe place. Because I think we can go back to work without feeling so scared that, once you are detected to be positive, is it life and death? That's what people are getting very concerned about. And I want to tell them no, because most of the people who are being discharged from our hospitals are all saying, we didn't feel anything. There's nothing. I mean, I don't think we really had much of a problem. We seem to have got over coronavirus quite easily. Not to say that we have serious cases and there are people dying, but those are in a very different bracket.
So
I say that we are in a safer place thanks to the lockdown, thanks to the quarantine measures, thanks to the zoning we are doing. We are in a much better place today. And remember, when 3rd of May comes, we will be more than 5 weeks into the lockdown, which is a large enough period of time to basically put ourselves into that zone of comfort where we know that things are slowing down, the spread is slowing down. We are already seeing that the doubling rate is now every 10 days instead of 3 days. All this data has to be looked at and viewed in a very rational way without panic.
So, Kiran, Biocon makes a lot of drugs and lots of therapies that deal with the kind of chronic diseases that Indians seem to have more of, and which Indians tend to get earlier in their lives, particularly diabetes, hypertension. You are one of the biggest producers of much cheaper insulin, for example. Now, the counter to what you are saying is that, look, in the Western world, people over 60 may be more vulnerable. But in India, people over 50 may have, in large numbers, be carrying the same pre-existing illnesses. And second, while only 10% Indians are over 60, 10% of Indians are nearly 13.5 crore people. That is more than twice the population of Italy. So it's a lot of people still, no?
Yeah, I certainly agree that there's a lot of people, but I think what we can do when we start lifting the lockdown is to have some safeguards. For instance, we must wear masks. We must basically have the temperature checks in public spaces. Okay. I think even if travel opens up, we must follow some of these protocols. I think if you look at the way we are also zoning our cities and our states, I think that's a very positive sign. I think, you're looking at red zones, orange zones, and, green zones. And you know that the green zones are fairly free. I mean, they're free of the virus. So you should be allowing them to be sealed off and functioning pretty normally. It is only the red zones that need to be completely sealed off in terms of ingress and egress. And the orange zones can be allowed to operate, but you need to have very strict surveillance. So I just believe that once the lockdown is lifted, I think you need to start doing population testing at a big scale. Okay. Things like, for instance, the serological test, pool testing. You need to have drive-in booths. You need to have all these booths in campuses. I think employers need to make sure that they do this testing very rapidly. So once you start generating that data, you will actually get more and more comfortable that we somehow have managed to tame the.
So what do we do when once if you start opening up and somebody turns out positive? What do you do with him or her?
Quarantine them. That's it. I mean,
Quarantine them.
I think you just use the same quarantine measures that you're doing today. In fact, one of the things I have been discussing is to say that today we are taking such extreme steps. If there's one positive person in a factory, they're shutting down the whole factory. If there are a couple of positive people who are testing positive in a hospital, like nurses and doctors, they're shutting down the whole hospital. I think this is not required.
It is not needed, you think?
No, not at all. I really think if anyone is testing positive, you just need to quarantine them. Once they get well, they can come back to work.
Only them, not people who've been in contact with them.
Yeah, as long as the others who've been in contact with that person is testing negative. That's what you need to do. When you do testing and you find one person,
test them and then decide.
Just test their immediate contacts and make sure that they are negative. If they are negative, they should be allowed to continue. But if they are positive, obviously you quarantine them as well. But there's no need to shut down the whole facility. You just keep quarantining people as and when you detect them. That's why you need to test people. Right now, the companies are so scared because on one hand, of course, there was a very draconian interpretation of a law that says that if the employers are found to not be doing proper testing or they are not sort of observing proper rules and regulations, they can be, jailed or arrested or whatever. That is a bit too much. Secondly, the notion that people have already got is that if anyone is tested positive in the workplace, the whole place has to shut down. So you can imagine the anxiety and the kind of feelings that employers have saying, oh my God, then it's better not to test at all. And that's not good either.
But it also leads to stigma because then if one
and
person,
that's the main thing.
All the others start hating that person.
And remember, we've seen that stigma effect with all the healthcare workers being attacked in this horrible way. And anybody with a, corona positive testing outcome is being looked at as a pariah. I mean, this is terrible.
Right.
I think we need to understand. And if you actually look at the numbers today, Shekhar, look, how many dengue cases do we have today? How many other viral cases, H1N1 cases do we have today? Do we ever look at a dengue patient and said, oh, this guy is bad for society, or H1N1 positive patient is bad for society? No. So we should get people to understand that this is another virus, but we need to deal with it in a collective way.
Right. So, so what is the way ahead, you think now? Step 1, 2, 3.
So as I said, India has done a phenomenal job of, the quarantine, the lockdown, the zoning measures, and we've saved lives. Okay, we've stopped the spread, we've saved lives for sure. Now it's time to save livelihoods. And I really don't think we can afford to be locked down too much more.
I think that's very well put. So let me repeat it. You said we've saved lives. Now is the time also to save livelihoods.
Yes.
Right.
So I really think this 5.5 weeks that we will have spent in a national lockdown is a good enough time for us to slow down the spread of the virus, to have a good surveillance system on the virus, and to know how to deal with the virus even in the hospitals. I don't know whether you know certain numbers.
No, please tell me.
100,000 beds that have been created for COVID patients. Okay. A very small fraction of that have actually been used. If you look at the number of ventilators that have been used cumulatively during this outbreak, the world was short of ventilators, right? I mean, there was pandemonium, whether it was
panic, yes.
New York. Here we have used much less than 100 ventilators cumulatively for all our population.
In the entire country.
In the entire country.
Right.
Other thing is, Shekhar, you can underreport the positive testing, but you can't hide deaths. You understand? So I think that's where we have to get some comfort, saying that not too many people are dying.
Now, Kiran, if I may
number of people who are positive, but that doesn't matter. You should worry about the severity of the disease and the deaths.
On the question of hiding deaths, if you see, say in Maharashtra, Devendra Fadnavis is saying this government is hiding deaths. It's calling them dead because of some other cause. And similarly in West Bengal now, the BJP is saying that Mamata Banerjee is hiding deaths. So you think such a thing is possible, or will you still say it is not possible?
See, I want to see how many, these allegations, how many deaths are they talking about? Are we seeing, I mean, if people are, you've seen it in many countries, people are dying like flies. You can't hide such numbers. I mean, a few here, I know what is happening. One of the things that is happening is that whoever is dying is not being tested.
Right.
That is one thing. Now, whether they're dying of natural causes, whether they're dying of some disease that they're suffering from, those kind of things we can't comment on. But the point is, somebody has done actually an assessment of, have there been a surge of deaths this year compared to last year? And I'm told there isn't. I would go by the broad metrics. I don't want to get into these anecdotal things, but if you go by the broad metrics, if you have a lethal outbreak like what COVID-19 is, you should have a surge of deaths, right?
Yeah. So I have a question from Kedar Agnihotri, who says how corporates will react to keeping employees safe under the pressure of shareholders to show their profits. Will there be an impact on their businesses overall? And maybe I think what he wants to ask is, don't you think employers could be callous with their employees' safety?
I think it's a very good question, and it depends, from company to company. I know that most of us are going to be extremely responsible, because I think it's very important to keep employees safe. Equally, as a science-led company, as a biotech company, we would definitely like to make sure that we let science lead our rationale. And we would test our employees. We will do pool testing. We will do serological testing to make sure that our entire workforce is safe, is tested, and feels very comfortable working alongside each other. I think that's very important. Whether you're a small startup with 5 people in a room, you want to make sure that it's all about self survival, right? I mean, I
Right.
don't want to be in a room. I don't want to be in a place where I know some people are positive, right? Why would you then try to suppress anything if the rules are that if anyone tests positive, please quarantine them? That's why I'm saying you need to have a very common sense policy that doesn't scare anybody and that doesn't nudge people into bad behavior or suppressing data.
So you will definitely not recommend that this lockdown be extended beyond May 3.
May 3rd, yes.
May 3rd.
Yeah. And I also believe that you shouldn't just open up all on May 3rd, but I think you can start opening up. Obviously, I don't think you can open up malls and all these public places, and you don't want big sporting events and those kind of things to happen for sure. But you can start opening up, normal other activities. I think companies can start operating. I think startups should be able to operate again. Kirana shops, anyway, you should be able to do it. Of course, there's a very interesting things that are happening in the way forward, in the way we live. Obviously, everyone will be wearing masks. I think today I read a report saying even China has opened up, but everybody is wearing masks.
Right.
China has opened up, but they are not allowing malls to open up. Okay. We also are in a fortunate situation that schools and colleges have summer holidays. So you can extend it till the end of June. I think that's when you start looking at opening up educational institutes. So I think we need to do it in a calibrated way, but you should start allowing life to come back to normalcy as much as possible because you want this fear psychosis to go out. Otherwise, you're going to create another health problem, which is mental health.
Right. So you say masks and things. So basically what will happen is people say how life will change after Corona. So take you back to 9/11. Everybody said how life will change after 9/11. So one thing that represents a change in our lives since then is the metal detector at the entrance
and all the security check, right?
All the security checks. So similarly, what used to be the metal detector,
you will actually have an additional check probably, that
which is the thermometer. The thermometer will be the new metal detector.
Yeah, but not just the thermometer. Some of the airlines are going so far as to give you a quick point of care test.
I see.
Emirates started that. So you might have that.
And you think that's one way of easing things up?
Yeah, then you will feel sure, comfortable that when you're on that flight, nobody at least has got COVID infection.
Yeah. So I have a question from Akash Aroda, who wants to know that how has this crisis exposed the weaknesses in India's healthcare system, and what can be done to fix it now?
So I think what the crisis showed up was that yes, we have a healthcare system that, at least in the government sector, had a lack of resources, but they quickly, actually, in all fairness to the government, they managed to kind of, upgrade some of their COVID hospitals and make them very functional for what it's required for. In the meantime, we've also seen the private sector start looking at creating dedicated COVID hospitals. So initially, obviously, we learned from outside. We said, do we have enough PPEs? No, we don't. Do we have enough test kits? No, we don't. Do we have enough masks? Question mark. So all these kind of questions started coming in. And in fact, this adversity has become quite an opportunity for us. Because in a very short time, in this preparedness planning, we suddenly found we could actually create kits ourselves. So a large number of Indian companies started making and assembling kits, the testing kits, the PCR kits.
Is Biocon doing any of that?
Yeah.
You are doing that.
We are actually developing serological kits now.
Okay. So tell us about the science of testing, because there is a lot of confusion about the science of testing. Which test works, which doesn't, which tells you what, which tells you you are sick, which tells you are not sick, which gives you a false positive, false negative.
Yeah. So the most reliable test today is the PCR test.
RT-PCR.
Okay, the RT, real-time PCR, polymerase chain reaction tests. This is where you basically are looking at the actual sequence, the RNA sequence of the whatever you're testing. So when you take a viral swab, you get viral RNA. And when you extract that viral RNA, you can actually read the sequence of that RNA and match it to what a COVID-19 RNA sequence is supposed to be. And if it matches, it is positive. If it doesn't match, it is negative. And so that's a very reliable test because it is at a genetic level, at the gene level, at the sequence level. Then you have the serological tests. Serological tests are about measuring antibodies. The most accurate way of measuring antibodies is to measure what we call as neutralizing antibodies. These are antibodies that specifically kill the COVID-19 virus. Okay. Now, right now, why are people all very confused about these antibody tests? Because the antibodies are actually not specific for COVID-19. They may be killing other, they might be responding to other kinds of viruses or even microbes or whatever. So because of that, they are not very happy with the accuracy of these tests. But now let me tell you, a large number of companies are beginning to create very, very accurate tests that in a very short time, you'll be able to rely on these serological antibody tests, which are very quick. So when you do these tests, you'll be able to do very large population testing, and you'll be able to do this, trying to develop herd immunity, because what it also measures is that whether you recovered from this COVID virus. And so if you can measure that, then you know that, oh, you're immune now, you can get into the population. And we all want to create this herd immunity. So the more people you get with this recovered antibody testing, then you will feel much more secure.
So what's your view on this panic that keeps rising every once in a while, that people who've recovered are coming back with the virus?
No, that I think has a lot of issues about it, because it depends how the testing was done. Was that a wrong test? Was it negative? Okay. And therefore, was the patient actually negative and now is positive? There are so many permutation combinations to that answer. But frankly speaking, I would not expect somebody who has recovered so recently to again get the infection so fast.
Yeah, science doesn't.
Science doesn't allow you to do that. Science will basically make you at least immune to this virus for quite a long time, not for just a few days. It gives you immunity for months, so it cannot be so fast.
So I have a question from Shivam Sarma, who says, in a democracy, everyone's voices must be or are needed to be heard. So after the emergence of social media, do you think now, this COVID crisis, the voice of the poor has been heard more or less? Or can governments be less callous or more callous? And to that, I think a more colorful question has come from Akash Arora, who says, will the governments change after this, or which will be like, jo ho gaya, so ho gaya, now carry on with life?
No, I think the government actually has been very, very focused and very concerned about the poor. Let me be very honest.
Right.
Okay, so I don't think you can blame the government for being callous. They actually did everything they could. From the first stimulus package they gave was for the poor. They wanted the poor to be the first beneficiaries of whatever they were going to provide. And the problem was that they hadn't anticipated certain behaviors of the people, of the poor people, such as the migrant labor. Believe me, I think everyone has offered help to migrant labor and to daily wage workers. But, they are anxious. Once you tell them that there's this horrible disease and everyone wants to go back and be with their families in their zone of comfort. So I think it has got nothing to do with, providing them with money or, salaries or food or anything of the sort. They are so, worried that what's going to happen to my families? Are they going to die in the village? I think those are the kind of anxieties that have made these people saying, look, we better be with our families if this is so bad. That is why I think, again, we need to, start looking at this whole panic and paranoia that has set into society with a lot more reason and a lot more data-backed reasons to say it's not so bad. Don't panic, and that there is no stigma attached to your positive testing.
So how did this stigma come? You're right. I don't think since the plagues of the past have we seen a stigma like that with any disease.
No, because we've made it into a frightful disease. We've made it into a disease that anybody can catch, right? We've said basically this contact tracing means, oh, even if this guy is standing next to you, you can get it. So obviously, when you speak to a large number of people who are so scared, they don't know what to do, there is going to be a stigma attached saying, I don't want to be anywhere near anybody who has got it. Whether it's my neighbor, whether it's the person I work with, whether it is a doctor, a nurse, anybody. You don't want to, catch it from anybody. That's the kind of panic.
People are driving their tenants out. If, for example, one of our journalists lives at a working women's hostel, and she's been told if she goes out on assignments covering COVID-19, she can't come back to the hostel. We had to finally get the cops involved. But it's very tough because.
But that's the panic and paranoia and the stigma that is now associated with what is defined as a deadly virus, right? So if it's a question of life and death that you have now created, anybody will have that problem with anyone who's positive, right? So to really focus on destigmatizing this virus, and you have to start telling people, listen, this only will affect at best some of the old, ill people. It is not going to affect you. And that's why we need more messaging from people who have recovered saying it was nothing. By the way, I felt nothing. By the way, don't get scared. I think we need much more of those videos to be flashed to tell people it's, but what do we do instead? We always flash videos from the West where somebody is saying, oh, I could hardly breathe. Oh, I've come back from the dead. These are the kind of videos bad news sells. So everybody only is showing that video. Nobody is showing videos about people who have really been through it very smoothly. Also, I want to tell you in North America, 47% of the people who died were obese, by the way.
Oh, obese at the morbid level.
Yeah. So please also look at data that way. And you know that 90% of the people in Italy who died were over the age of 80. And so is the case in Spain. So you look at some of that data, and a large number of people have died in home for the aged, like these home for the elderly people. That practice is not in India.
Right.
Having a large number of old people in one home is not the practice in India. So you're not going to see that kind of impact in terms of mortality.
So also look at the good side of what you have here in India.
Yeah. So those are some of the things we should look at.
So I have a connected question from Sharmishta Upadhyay, who says, coronavirus has exposed our inequalities. Will the pandemic, apart from bringing a technical revolution, bring a socio-political revolution as well?
Well, as our Prime Minister said, this virus does not spare you based on your affluence level, your religion, your caste, creed, gender, age. I mean, it can also get at you even if you're younger, but it doesn't kill you. I mean, it basically can infect you. It does not hurt anybody in terms of infection. So that way, it's made us all realize that we are human beings at the end of it all, and that's what matters. You're going to get infected if you're a human being. And I think you don't have to worry about mortality unless you are in one of those little segments where you are old, you have comorbidities, you have a poor immune system. I mean, there is a 90-year-old who actually recovered from coronavirus.
Right? Kerala, 92-year-old.
Yeah, 92.
I think his wife is 88. Both recovered.
Yeah, so both of them recovered. So they had good immune systems and they've recovered. But I'm saying, these are, so we need to look at data in a much more confident way rather than panicking.
Right. So I have a question from Himani Chandana, who's my colleague who also covers your sector, pharma and health. And she says, brilliant correspondent. She says, what do you think about the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine? To which let me also add other therapies, remdesivir, and plasma therapy, which are now being looked at. Give us your assessment. Also tell us about the work you are doing. I know that you and Dr. Siddharth Mukherjee, who's a celebrity oncologist and a great doctor, you are working on some immune therapies also.
So let me start by saying that of all that you mentioned, the most credible and promising is the plasma therapy.
I see.
Because science drives that rationale. What is plasma enrichment therapy? Basically, you're taking the plasma of recovered patients. And these recovered patients obviously have neutralizing antibodies which actually have killed the virus, right? And so when you take that out and concentrate those neutralizing antibodies and then
These are the antibodies who won the battle.
correct.
Right.
So once you take that out and you actually then give it back to a serious patient who's trying to fight the disease, you're giving that patient ammunition to fight that virus. And so far, all the plasma trials that have been done in the world have actually given very good results. By the way, this is not a new therapy. This is an age-old therapy which was even used in the time of the Spanish flu,
1897,
1918.
1897, even for diphtheria, in fact.
Yeah. So
That
it's a
was
well-known therapy. It is like a vaccine therapy. No, basically what you're saying is a vaccine makes you produce antibodies. Here you're giving the antibodies to the body, right, to fight that virus.
So what India needs,
Vaccine, a
right?
vaccine is basically like giving a very mild version of the virus so that your body can actually produce antibodies against it. And that's how you immunize yourself. And once those antibodies form in a big way, you get memory antibodies that help you throughout to fight that virus if it comes again. So convalescent patients have fought the virus. And those antibodies with which it has fought the virus, you are basically concentrating it and giving it to serious patients who are recovering. So that is the best of the therapies, and it is a very scientifically backed therapy. Now comes the next therapy, which you asked me about, some remdesivir and hydroxychloroquine.
Right.
Now, hydroxychloroquine unfortunately has a checkered history. You really don't know which trials are good or bad, because for every good trial, there's also a bad trial. So the data, the jury is out there to say, does it really work? And I would say that something like hydroxychloroquine has a big question mark around it. Does it work? Doesn't it work? It can have a big placebo effect. Let me tell you that.
Right.
Then
People who are having it can get the confidence that something is working for me.
Yeah. Then you have, and it's, you've got lots of other things like the BCG vaccine, which is also going to be tried. Somebody's mentioned a polio vaccine. These are all just boosting the immune system. It's not specific, by the way. Then you have something like remdesivir, which is a antiretroviral, which has been used in Ebola and a few cases, and they feel that it might have a very good role to play because this is a RNA virus, and it is an RNA virus attacking antiretroviral, so it could act. And I think so far the data is looking promising. Let's hope it has good data.
Are you working on those trials also? Biocon?
No. So remdesivir is a solidarity trial. So I think everybody around the world is participating.
Right.
I think this is worth trying because if it does work well, it gives you hope. Because till the vaccine arrives, at least you've got something that's working. This was similar what happened in the case of AIDS, right? HIV AIDS, till you got your ARVs to work, everyone thought that, it was a death sentence the moment you got it.
Right.
So this is what gives you the hope that, yes, now we can have a drug that actually helps patients and to recover. Then, of course, what Siddharth and I are working on is really to, instead of giving plasma therapy antibodies, you can actually create NAbs or neutralizing antibodies and culture them in a bioreactor at scale and give it to the patients. Okay.
I see. So basically, you take plasma.
It's like how we make
antibodies from plasma.
No. It's like how we make monoclonal antibodies. You basically generate NAbs or neutralizing antibodies, make them into, you convert them into a clone or whatever you want to call it, into a plasmid, and then you start uh, replicating it in a bioreactor, and then you basically give it to the patient. So that's also like the same plasma therapy, but in a much bigger scaled way, because the problem with plasma therapy is you can't scale it up. Whereas this kind of antibody therapy, you can scale it.
Yeah. So how far are you? How far have you reached with that?
Well, these are kind of therapies which you need to do trials with. So, we will only probably start doing trials maybe in 3 months from now. So this is like a long-term solution, saying tomorrow, if you still get these COVID virus patients, at least there's a good therapy you can give them. So that will take time. But I think all the hope is pinned on vaccines, because I know that many companies are developing vaccines, and hopefully that vaccines, the UK company is saying the vaccine could come as early as September, October. If that happens, that will be the best news for the world. And since they are also working with Serum Institute, at least Indians will have access to that vaccine, hopefully.
To that vaccine. So that's a question that Prabodh Kumaya has. He says, is there any hope of getting a vaccine for India, and by when?
So I think I've answered that question, but also more importantly, India also needs to develop its own vaccine. And I think I've seen 2 or 3 of these programs being developed in India, and they are very, very promising. So even those need to actually be developed and brought to the market. And I hope that will happen within a year's time.
And you take this Serum Institute of India quite seriously, the Indian company.
Serum Institute basically is one of the largest vaccine producers in the world.
Right.
For this particular case, they are like a contract manufacturer, but because the group in the UK are just a small research group, so they need to partner with a large company. And that's good, because they will transfer the technology will be scaled up, and they'll make it at large scale. So at least we will have our own access in India to these vaccines.
And India gives scale for everything.
Yes.
So I have Sahil Karir who's saying, post-COVID-19, can India become the hub for foreign investors in biopharmaceuticals and biotechnology? And he says, how can Biocon and other companies grab this opportunity?
So, this is a very interesting question. In fact, I wrote a piece on this saying that what this COVID crisis has thrown up is really bringing to the fore all our capabilities and competencies of our scientists in this country. And I was so inspired and impressed with what I saw coming out of our CSIR labs. Shekhar Mande and I had a little brainstorming session, and I was very impressed.
Shekhar Mande heads the CSIR.
Yes. And, we had a brainstorming session where he wanted to share all that's happening in CSIR labs. And I was very impressed and inspired by all the programs that are ongoing in our, public sector labs. In addition to that, all the startups in this country are also doing phenomenal work. Many of them have been backed by BIRAC. And, the sad thing is, none of these companies were getting any funding from VCs. Okay,
Right.
BIRAC was doing its job. But VC dollars were just going into IT. If you had any med tech with a software element to it, they would invest in you. But if you had a great idea for a new vaccine, forget it. This is the attitude. And I can tell you, there was another, today I got a message from one of the companies that I'm mentoring. They are developing an antibiotic for superbugs, okay? And they've been struggling for finance, struggling for funding. Today, they suddenly got $7.5 million.
Superbugs, if I may explain, superbugs are those bacteria that don't respond to any known antibiotics.
Yeah. So they were struggling for funding because nobody wants to invest in infectious diseases. Today, now, everybody wants to invest in a vaccine company. Everybody wants to invest in a diagnostic company. Everybody wants to invest in life tech, which is great news for us because we actually have very, very high-end capabilities. And
so I have a question.
Long last, you will see funding in that sector.
So I have a question on science from Shehbaz Qazi, who says, has the present pandemic changed the outlook of how the researches were framed and carried out over the years? Will this change our methodologies of developing drugs and vaccines going ahead?
Absolutely, because I think now there's a recognition of what we can do and what we must do. For instance, today I have been discussing with Dr. Renu Swaroop of the Department of Biotechnology, Secretary Department of Biotechnology, and we have put together a national consortium for the indigenization of biomedical resources. Okay. And we want to do it at scale because we realize that everything we do in this country is imported,
including gloves, PPEs.
Yeah, but that has happened now. See, we've repurposed
Masks.
our businesses of masks, PPEs, gloves, footwear. Now it's all being made in India. But forget that. We are talking about more the research side of things. All these.
In fact, we have a story today from Ludhiana. Two of our reporters, Taran Deol and Urjita Bhardwaj, have done it, or how some garment factories in Ludhiana have repurposed to making PPEs now.
Correct. All these garment factories, whether it's in Tirupur, whether it is in Ludhiana, whether it is anywhere, they're all doing this. Okay. But let me give you what is happening today. Now, when we look at how do we do things at scale, so let's look at a simple thing like a diagnostic kit. Okay. I told you we were importing all the components. So whatever our kit manufacturers are doing today is just assembling. Now we need to actually indigenize those components. And these components are quite complex. Okay. They're not simple things. It's like, you need to have, say, what we call as probes and primers, which are really the sequences which you're going to compare when you do the test, right? Then you need something called Taq polymerase and reverse transcriptase. These are enzymes that are used in that polymerase chain reaction.
Yeah, it is RT-PCR. RT is reverse transcriptase.
Yeah. So then you also need things like, viral extraction, RNA extraction kits. That's also quite a complex process. You need viral collection kits so that you actually collect the virus very safely. When you collect the swab, you don't want the virus to spread everywhere. So you put it in a buffer that inactivates the virus. So things like that. And we are saying, now, how do we do all this? And lo and behold, we found we have capabilities that can actually do every one of these things. So we are actually now going to produce it at scale and we can export these things to the world. So can you imagine what is happening to, this is like a eureka moment. It's a self-discovery moment where you're suddenly discovering, oh, you can do this, you can do this. Oh, I can do this high-end sequencing. Oh, I can do this, I can do that. Suddenly you're realizing you have this wealth of talent sitting there latently. And now is the time it's being discovered. So I think we can do a lot. And
these are strange
very
times.
Important sector.
These are times when a 90-year-old drug like chloroquine can suddenly acquire this global oomph and becomes a kind of soft power. So I have a question from Unnati, which is a little bit away from science. She says, do you see any hope that government will help entrepreneurs right now given this crisis? And is it something that you would recommend that the government does?
Yes, I think one of the stimulus package has to be about that, because we do need a lot of new thinking because the world is going to be different. For instance, Zoom has now become like a VC standard. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, we can we should be developing a conferencing,
software. Yes.
Right.
Right.
And so there's so much happening. Today it's going to be a digital world. We've been thrown into the deep end. Now there are lots of opportunities. The naysayers of telemedicine, of online education, of, all digital online remote working, all these things are happening, without us being able to discuss it. So going forward, I think many of these things can actually become a norm. We can repurpose our business models. We can repurpose a lot of things we are doing today. We know we won't be able to travel, and travel hasn't affected us actually, if you think about it. Normally, Shekhar, you and I would be having this chat at BIC in Bangalore.
That's right. Yes.
Doing it as effectively, if not more, because we are getting many more people and a bigger reach.
That's right.
So technology is suddenly descending on.
The only pity is we can't offer them any hospitality.
Well, I think that will amuse themselves with their own hospitality. But no, jokes apart, I think a lot of things is going to change. And that offers startups a big opportunity. It offers the country a huge opportunity. And I've been saying that we are going to save a lot of money from oil imports.
Right.
At least a certain chunk of that should be reserved for stimulating the economy in terms of both the SMEs and the large scale sector.
I think that's a very good thought. Now, I have a question from Shekhar Gupta, and I'm not taking this question because his name sounds like mine. It's spelled with an I, but it's a question very relevant to your area of business. He says, as far as APIs are concerned, APIs are
active pharmaceutical ingredients.
Pharmaceutical ingredients, which basically make the drug. He says, as far as APIs are concerned, we rely heavily on China for their supplies, and we saw a major disruption because of COVID. Why did that happen? And what can be done right now? And he says, now, given that Kiran Shaw's Biocon being a giant generic API manufacturing company, what strategy is she employing to mitigate any such crisis in future to make India self-reliant and an exporter of APIs? Right up your street.
It's a very good question. And let me also assure Shekhar Gupta that, look, even prior to COVID, we had realized that the supply chain between the Chinese supply chain was being disrupted, not because of COVID, but because of many other environmental issues and warning letters from the FDA. So we were seeing regulatory disruption and environmental disruption in Chinese companies.
US FDA.
Yeah. So right. US FDA was giving warning letters to Chinese manufacturers. Then there were a lot of environmental regulations in China which just shut down certain companies who were supplying companies with starting material and APIs. And suddenly there was a huge supply chain disruption, right? So even a year ago, we started saying, how do we reduce our dependence on China? And this dialogue has started more than a year ago. And a lot of starting material and a lot of, we know that antibiotics was something that we used to do very well in India.
Yes, now azithromycin, again a drug in demand, all the APIs come from China now.
Yeah. So we were making it in the past, but we gave it off to China because of national price control, by the way. So price control should see how they have driven away production and manufacturing from India to low-cost havens. And
how did that happen, if you can explain?
Well, we used to make antibiotics in the past, and then there was a price control that says you cannot price your antibiotics more than X. And that became quite a pressure point for Indian companies making antibiotics. And then they found out they could buy it even cheaper from China. So then they said, why make it? We'll buy it from China, so that we'll make some profit. So slowly they stopped manufacturing it and they started importing everything from China until there came a day when we made zero antibiotics and we were getting everything from China because China was about 30% lower than our costs, right? Now we realize that we need to bring back that antibiotic business to India. So I think that's where I want to, again, this is a separate discussion we should have, saying, how do we make sure that we do not suffocate our industry to the point where we actually cede it to some other country? So now that realization and recognition is coming that no, I think India needs to bring back much of this manufacturing and we have the capabilities. So bringing it back is not a big deal.
So basically we shot the wheel in our own car.
Yes.
So Kiran, coming back now to our theme now. You are saying COVID is a terrible challenge, but we should not be as scared as we are.
And we should remove the stigma.
Remove the stigma. It's an infectious disease like many other infectious diseases. Second, you are saying that because India has a much younger population, the figure of fatalities shows that combination of our demographics and maybe also some residual immunities is protecting us. Is there science to that?
We have to prove it. We need much more data to show that,
But you see indications of that.
Yeah.
Because there was a story in the Hindu last week that said that how the subcontinent is an outlier because it has 22% of the world's population. But less than at this point about 30,000 cases and less than 1,000 dead.
Yeah.
So there might be some signs to that.
Yeah, we need to. So I think we need to focus on epidemiological studies in a much bigger way in this country. And we should also be doing a lot more viral research, because that's what we are always faced with. And why shouldn't India be a global hub for viral research and epidemiological studies on infectious diseases? We had done that. So there was a TB research center. We had the National Institute of Virology for all these things, National Institute of Immunology, and InTech. Lot of those institutes have been created. Let's reorient them
To viruses. Well, I mean, it's an unkind thing to say, but
and infectious diseases in general.
Yeah, I said it's an unkind thing to say, but China will have the domination in producing new viruses. So somebody has to start researching into them.
Yeah.
So you would say get back to work.
Yeah. From May 3rd, not in a crazy way, not in a callous way, but in a calibrated way with a lot of safeguards and surveillance. So that if there's any outbreak anywhere, you can create a red zone and carry on with life.
Right. The next thing you are saying is protect the vulnerable people. That's older people, particularly older people with
comorbid
sicknesses. Chronic sicknesses which lower your
immunity.
And would you like public transport coming back?
I think we can bring it back in stages. I think right now public transport should be used by companies to ferry their employees. But very soon, I think you should allow public transport back on the roads, and then finally flights and trains. Trains can come also at some stage. You can start
in limited way with limited passengers. So Kiran, now we can go in this direction, but that's if we trust the government's data. So would you trust today's testing data? Number one, are we testing enough? Number two, are you sure nobody's fudging either the testing data or the data of deaths?
So we are not testing enough, that's a fact, but I trust the data that has been shared in the public domain.
Why do you say so?
I don't think we are fudging. I don't think we are fudging data, because I said to you that, yes, I personally believe that we are underreporting the positive cases because we are not testing enough. If you don't test, you can't have more data, right? No. So whatever data you're getting is believable. Is that data adequate? That's a different question.
Right.
Whatever data has been shared in the public domain is accurate data. You can't say that they're fudging that data.
And data of hospitalizations and deaths and intubation, as it's called.
Yeah, I think all that data, whatever they're sharing, is correct.
Correct. Because you also monitor it closely in Bangalore and Karnataka. In fact,
I'll give you an example. We have got a dedicated COVID hospital, many of them in the country. They are empty.
Right.
We even created isolation hotels as a step-up kind of model or a step-down model, whatever you want to call it. And we were hoping that the mild cases will come into those kind of hotel converted into nursing homes with telemedicine and nursing support. Not any patients there. And everyone is grumbling, saying the people who are now suffering are the non-COVID patients, because they are not able to come to the hospitals because of the lockdown.
So some normalcy has to be restored there as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Some normalcy has to be restored there as well.
Absolutely.
So once again, once again, 3 weeks from now, what kind of an India are you anticipating?
I'm anticipating an India which will at least get back a lot of its, basic economic activity going. Definitely, there are going to be many sectors which will be badly hit. We can't do much about that. Aviation sector, the hospitality and tourism sector. But even tourism, you can open up some of these game parks and things like that, wherever you have distancing and things. But I think we are going to see some sectors impacted, but by and large, I think we should be back to at least 50% normalcy.
So Kiran, since you are seeing data very closely, particularly in Karnataka, is the data of deaths and critical illnesses telling us something in Karnataka?
So Karnataka actually has it quite under control, by the way, because we've seen some very good zoning. If you look at Karnataka data, we've got about 16 or 17 deaths in the state, and we've got about probably 400 odd cases, positive cases. And I can tell you that people are doing things in a very stringent, disciplined way. I know that we are talking to our government saying, listen, guys, please let us open up on the 3rd of May. And we are actually telling them what to do. And this is one state that has actually believed, and we put that, that proposal forward saying, please link economic activity to the threat level or the risk level, which is red, green, and amber.
Right.
And they have actually followed it, because we have many red zones within Bangalore itself. They have done a very good map.
Karnataka has done well, but these serious illnesses or criticality of illnesses
is very low.
Is very low, but do we have some indications as to who's more at risk there?
Well, we've seen that, for instance, all the, most of the people who died, the male people, the deceased, were all heavy smokers, for instance. One data that came out. And of course, most of them were either diabetic or renal failure or cancer patients, or, most of them have been in that category and in that sort of older age group. There are one or two who are younger than 60. But
right.
By and large, I think they've been in that kind of an age group.
Yeah. So that is the demographic that should be very careful.
So, Shekhar, I need to...
Thank you very much, Kiran. I know we've taken a lot of your time. And
thank you. It was a pleasure.
But we have learned so much. I have learned so much. And I'm quite sure all our viewers have learned a lot, and they'll keep watching it. And if they come back with more questions, we'll come back.
Sure.
Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Goodbye. And
keep up forward. Let's look forward.
And keep up your optimism.
Yes. Let's look forward to the May 3rd with optimism.
Thank you very much.